thanks so much for having me. I was thinking last night, after seeing so many friends here at SAIS when I got here and people coming up to me and being so kind, I've had the good fortune to start working with a large number of Canadian independent schools. I'll mention that a little bit later. And we all know that Canadians are just the friendliest people in the world. But I said to myself, the friendliness of a Canadian is like a firm handshake and a cold beer. And the friendliness of SAIS schools is like a big smile and a warm hug. And I really mean that. I really appreciate you having me back. And there are so many folks here in the room who I know and recognize, and I've visited your schools and of all the regions, to be honest, and don't tell ASNE or NICEAS or anything this, I do love coming down and working with you folks. So that's one start. A second, I don't think that anything that I'm going to talk about today is going to will divert or diverge much from what Dr. Pearson was talking about in that marvelous keynote. Hope it'll go on a little bit of a different tangent, but that was some wonderful prelude, and I can't maybe in real time link up some of my work with hers, but the linkages are there. And there was one other thing I wanted to say to start. The third thing I'd like to say is those of you with whom I've worked at your schools know that what I really love to do is have highly interactive sessions where we burn through thousands of Post-it notes, lots of flip chart paper the walls with our thoughts and all that. That is very difficult to do in a 75-minute session. This is not going to be interactive, and I apologize for that. But I've got a fire hose of stuff that I want to share with you, and I will leave some room. I'll try to take some breaks for questions, but I just apologize. This is not my normal modality. Is one person talking at a whole bunch of other smart people. It's antithetical to what we know about great learning, but that's just the way the format is for today. We are undergoing a remarkable period of evolution in K-12 education, unlike anything we've seen in the last 150 years. At the core of that is a competitive market environment that did not exist for any of us up until about 20 years ago. Our families have vastly greater choice than they've ever had in the past about where they're going to send their children to get an education. And that statement is a statement that I make to independent school folks, and I made the exact same statement to 110 superintendents 2 weeks ago, and nobody in the room was shaking their head saying, no, that's not true. So this is not something that's specific to independent schools, tuition charging schools, charter schools, et cetera. It's the same for a public school superintendent that has schools with internal district choice, cross-district choice, changes in demographics that we see. It's not the same everywhere around the country. It's dependent on what market you're in, et cetera. But the reality is that we are in this evolutionary period of dramatic market differentiation. I am not going to go in a terribly great extent about the arguments of why schools should change. There really are three existential questions that you all have been wrestling with and I've been digging into for the last 6 or 7 years. And by the way, it was exactly 7 years ago this week that I was driving through Atlanta in my Prius on that crazy trip. Exactly 7 years ago. Why should schools change? What's that change going to look like? And how are we all going to get there? As far as I'm concerned, the first question, why, that train left the station, and I think it has for most of you. The question of what is that going to look like, I think there's a tremendous amount of convergence, and I want to dig into that just a little bit, but what I really want to focus on is how are we going to get there? And I think the work that I've tried to do, and the reason I published this most recent book, Thrive, is that we know how to do that. We know how to change organizations. What does that mean in terms of school world? Schools are not Microsoft. We're not General Motors. We're different places. But a lot of the same methodologies apply, but we have to translate into our experience and our language. This is, I think, the paradigm statement that we have to understand. We are going through a period of evolution, and I'm an old geologist. Evolution is neither fair nor kind. It is just a force of nature. There were some of the most wonderful, well-meaning, efficient, fabulous Tyrannosaurus rexes that did not make it through the Cretaceous extinction. Individuals and species survive and thrive, and individuals and species die out during periods of evolution. We want you to survive and thrive. You're not going to get there by just playing the same game you've always played. You may, or you may not. But as Dr. Pearson said, you've got to make these decisions on a probability-adjusted basis, and probability says you should be doing some things, not standing pat. There are 6 elementary schools, I said 6 elementary schools that 3 years ago said we're going to offer a personalized learning track alongside a traditional learning track for our students. Parents, you choose which one you want your students to be in. I visited a lot of your schools, and I think probably most of you in your mission statement say something about paying attention to the needs of the individual child. At these schools, the nominal student-teacher ratio is 25-1. There's special ed. 15% of kids have special education portfolios in these schools. They get about $7,000 a year from the state per student to run these schools. Here are the takeaways I had after watching this. First of all, I was blown away by the ownership, the student ownership of kids as young as 2nd grade. Number one, their test scores are escalating. Why? Because the kids who have been struggling in the past are getting more differentiated, personalized instruction, and they're doing better. The kids are at the higher flying end. They're flying as high as possible. Number two, in 3 years, given the choice, parents who came in where the buzz in the parking lot was, what are those weird people over there at those elementary schools doing? I'm not sure about it. Once the kids were enrolled in this track, in 3 years, they have had one family deselect back to the traditional learning track, and they've had 0 faculty deselect back to the traditional learning track. This goes on in the middle school, and I have slides I'm not going to take care of showing you what it looks like in the middle school, and it's starting to transition up to the high school. And here's the most important takeaway I had. In talking with a 14-year veteran teacher who had been teaching in the traditional school, elementary school there, and then launched into this personalized learning track, she said, Grant, I just want to be really honest with you. I always thought I knew all of my students as individuals, and I never did. Now I do. So here's a school that is charging their parents 0 tuition. They're doing it on $7,000 a year per student per year, and they are delivering what blew me away as individualized, personalized learning tracks, and it wasn't being done by sitting kids in front of a bunch of computers all day. There's manipulatables and group work and individual work and worksheets and lecture and instruction and all those things. And the last one is that I talked to a teacher who was just starting her work in this personalized learning track. I was there in October, and she said, well, yeah, I'm still getting used to it. And the woman who was her mentor said, yeah, it'll be okay. You'll have it by Thanksgiving. She goes, yeah, I'm not worried about that. They'd started instruction, professional development in June, and by Thanksgiving, they're comfortable with how to do this. These folks basically said, we are not running an aircraft carrier trying to turn an aircraft carrier. We can do it much more quickly than that, and it's tremendously effective. I worry for a lot of your schools about the possibility that school opens across, a school like that opens across the street from you. I know where I would send my kid to elementary school regardless of whether tuition was being charged or not. It's a fabulous school. This is, I believe, the hand that we've all been dealt, that you've all been dealt running schools. You didn't ask for this hand, but the fact of the matter is we live in a rapidly changing world, the VUCA acronym. We are living in a time of consumer-driven demand of families saying, this is what I want, provide it to me, and we need to do that. Our families have many school options. We're learning more every day about how kids actually learn well, and yet we have the inevitable obstacles to change. Didn't ask to be dealt that hand. Your predecessors 20 or 30 years ago were not, but this is the hand you've been dealt and what we have to deal with. And so here's the sweet spot that all of us as educators, public-private schools alike, are trying to hit. We've always had some standards that we've had to meet, and you, the professional educators, regardless of what your customers say, you know how students learn best. And we're seeing real convergence around the fact that student-centered learning is better than teacher-centered learning. Deeper learning is better than regurgitation, et cetera. So we're not going to relitigate all of that. This is the additional circle over here that comprises the Venn diagram. What do our customers love? And this is why I wrote this book, Thrive, and that's why I want to go through the major sort of sections of this today, because that's the sweet spot overlap that we all have to hit in order to achieve the success of the hand we've been dealt. This work really then focuses on these 5 areas. You can't pick and choose. You can't say, I'm going to really focus on what our differentiated value of our school is, but we're going to do that agnostic of what our community's values are. All of these 5 elements are critical and have to be aligned in order for you to achieve that success, that key of ongoing, sustainable demand for your school, for you to be the school that families say, we pick you out of all the increased number of options that we have today, regardless of things like what you charge for tuition and that sort of thing. Those are big issues. We're not going to sweep them under the rug, but the first thing is you have to have a school that your community says, I really, really want to send my kids there. That is your lifeblood. And so here's sort of the framing questions that I wrote in the introduction to the book. Can your school/district become the one that's attracting more students? Yes. Is it simple and quick? No. Are there plenty of pitfalls? Yeah. Will it work? Yes. And how do we know? Because there are schools all over the country doing this successfully and well. I think the only thing that I bring to our collective table is I'm the lucky guy that gets to go and visit lots and lots of schools and districts, synthesize what works, find out what works. And as I'll mention later, in the appendix of this book, I just listed all the schools I've been tracking that are doing school differently and doing things successfully that you go, you know what? Maybe we want to do that too. You don't have to reinvent this wheel, and you shouldn't have to. You don't have the time to do that. You're running your schools. But you're not going to change your school by just shoveling coal faster into a coal-fired steam engine. There's a reason we don't have coal-fired steam engines any longer dragging trains around the country. You can shovel as much coal as fast as you want into a coal-fired steam engine, and it ain't going to go any faster. We have to rethink some elements of what the school looks like. As somebody said the other, I think it was in Mike Cobb's presentation, Mike said he told one of his board members, if you want change, you have to realize something. Change requires change. I think it's a marvelously succinct little bit of knowledge to keep in our heads. So there's sort of 3 elements of this, and then I'll organize the book, but how I'll organize this talk. Number 1, we've got to align these 3 elements, value, strategy, and innovation. Number 2, we've got to use the big tools that we know work of how an organization changes. And number 3, we've got to really engage our communities in ways that we understand what they value, find that sweet spot in the Venn overlap, not do everything that the community tells us to, because we know how kids learn best, but find that Venn overlap. And we need to use knowledge base that goes well beyond education. There are all sorts of sources of knowledge about how to engage communities, stakeholders, how to learn about what our customers value that lie outside of the knowledge base of traditionally how we have worked as schools, and we should take advantage of those. So let me just dive into these, and I'm going to do one section at a time and have some questions maybe after each section.